I'm going to walk you through how to estimate descriptive statistics in Excel. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. One using the built-in functions that are accessible without any add-ons. And then we'll also do it using the Analysis TookPak and the Descriptive Statistics function. That one I don't think looks as good as doing it by hand, but I'll show you both ways just in case you ever want to do it the other way. So if you notice how this is set up, I have my columns here. So my observation, sold month, area, zip, days on market. And I have these grouped where these are the variables that I'm going to describe using the descriptive statistics. It doesn't make any sense to take the average of the area, the average of the zip. These are the quantitative variables that we want to describe. And right here, I have those variables in the exact same order that they show up here. So days on market, bedrooms, full baths, partial baths. So I have the statistics that I want to estimate right here and the variables across the top. And that's going to make it easier to enter the functions in one column and then drag those over to get the remaining variables. So the way I get these columns at the top without having to write them, so I'm going to just delete all of this to show you how I do that. So what I do, I click in that cell, and I do equals, and then I reference this cell right here. So I'm going to let the value in N1 be equal to the value in E1. And when I hit enter, that title is going to show up. And if I hover over the bottom right of this and get that little black cross, and I drag that to the right, I got to go one more, it will fill in those headings. So now this is referencing column K, this is referencing column J, and so on. And that keeps you from making silly mistakes where you put the variables in the wrong order or you misspell the variable. The less you type, the less mistakes you're going to make. So use these little shortcuts to make your life a little bit easier. So what we want to do for each of these variables, we want the mean, the median, the min max, the first quartile, third quartile, variance, standard deviation, the range, which is just the minimum minus the maximum, the interquartile range, which is Q3 minus Q1, skewness, and kurtosis. So to find the average, we're going to click in the cell for, in this case, N2, equals, we're going to start typing average. Once average is highlighted, you can hit tab. And we want this to be the average of column E. So if we type E colon E, this will take the average of the values in column E. And Excel's smart enough to ignore that days on market heading at the top. So hit enter, and the mean is 93.07. So on average, homes are on the market for about 93 days. The median, we're going to do equals, start typing median. As soon as it's highlighted, you can hit tab, E colon E, because we want the median of column E. Hit enter. The median home was on the market for 73 days. So since the average is greater than the median, it means we have some large values that are pulling that average up. And we'll see later that our skewness is going to be positive, which is going to tell us we have a longer right tail. And we'll see that when we make the histogram later. So the minimum equals min. So as soon as it's highlighted, hit tab, and we want E colon E. So it's going to give us the the minimum value for days on market. So there were homes that sold in 0 days. It's possible that you have a home that's not really listed, but it's for sale by owner, and it goes on the market and the contract is signed in the first day. So it's off the market as soon as it goes on the market. So a 0 is not an anomaly. It's not really common, but it's a reasonable number. If you had a negative number, we would need to go back and look at the data and see what's going on. The maximum equals max, E colon E. So the longest was 472 days, so over a year. It's like a year and 100 days, like a year and a third, almost a year and a quarter for the longest day. I mean, for the longest time on market. So Q1, you have to be a little bit careful. There are two ways to do this. So for the first quartile, we want quartile. It gives us an exclusive and inclusive option. One excludes the median, one includes the median. So we're going to go with inclusive, and we want E colon E. But now we have to tell it which quartile we want. So we're going to do comma 1. So this will give us the first quartile for the values in column E. So which is 46 days. So that would be the same as the 25th percentile. So 25% of homes, approximately 25% of homes sold in 46 days or less. Q3, we're going to do the quartile. Start typing QU as soon as quartile is highlighted. Go to inclusive, hit tab, E colon E, comma 3. And this is going to give us the third quartile, which is 120 days, or 120.5 days. So 75%, this is the same as the 75th percentile. So approximately 75% of homes sell in 120 days or less. The variance, we're going to start equals var, and there are a couple options for variance. So there's var.a and var.p and var.s. Var.p is a population variance. Var.s is a sample variance. You always want to make sure you do var.s since we're working with a sample, not a population. E colon E. So the variance is a large number, but we don't really care about the variance because the units are squared. So if you think about if you remember the formula for variance from your Econ 206, it's that sum of x minus x bar squared. And since the units are squared, or since we square, the units are not the same as the actual variable that we're measuring. So we don't really interpret the variance that often. The standard deviation is the square root of the variance, and that puts it back in units that are comparable to the actual variable that we are measuring. So for standard deviation, we want to do stdev.s. So if you start typing st, we want to make sure we get the .s, E colon E. And that's the standard deviation of days on market. So 68.13 days. So it's telling us kind of the average deviation from the mean for days on market. So we would say it has the home sales on average. The average time on market is 93 days with a standard deviation of 68.13 days. The range is just the max minus the min. So if we do equals, I'm going to reference the sales that we already have since there's not a function for the range. I'm going to do N5 minus N4. And in your data, you would just reference whatever cells have the min and max. It's not always going to be N5 minus N4. Hit enter. And since our lower bound is 0, the range is just the same number as the max. That's not always the case. It just happened for this variable. The interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1. So this is going to be N7 minus N6. 74.5. So that's the difference between the third quartile and the first quartile. And we like the interquartile range sometimes because the range is sensitive to extreme values. So let's say we had one home in there that was on the market for 3 years. Well, that range is going to look really, really large. The interquartile range looks more inside that distribution at the 25th and 75th percentiles, and it's less sensitive to outliers. So you can be it's a little more conservative than the range when you have extreme values. The skewness, we're going to do skew. Get there a skew and skew.p, just use skew. And that's going to be E colon E as well, since we want the days on market. Hit enter. So the skewness is 1.63. So a skewness of 0 would tell us that distribution is perfectly symmetric. A skewness that's positive tells us that it has a longer right tail. So we have values that are large and positive. in this case, or well above the mean. If the skewness was negative, it would tell us we have extreme values below the mean. And um, that would actually show up a little bit up here with the mean and median. If it's perfectly symmetric, your mean and median will be the same. If it's skewed right, your mean will be larger than your median. And if it's skewed left, your mean will be less than your median. And kurtosis is K-U-R-T, Kurt, E:E. And this number is hard to interpret. It tells us how thick the tails of the distribution are, but we really just compare it to the normal distribution. So the normal, if something is truly normally distributed, you'd have an excess kurtosis of 0, because the normal distribution has a kurtosis of 3, but what Excel actually gives you is excess kurtosis. So if you have a kurtosis that is positive, it means there's more area in the tails of the distribution than the normal distribution would have. And if it's negative, you have less in the tails than a normal distribution would have. So the reason we set it up like this is because now that we have the descriptive statistics for the days on market variable, we can highlight these columns, go to the bottom right, and where it picks up that little black cross, drag that over, and now we have descriptive statistics for all the variables. When it does this right here, all that means is it can't display all the numbers because the column's too wide. So you can just highlight all of those columns and just go between any two of them and double click, and it'll expand it so that you can actually see all the values. So these are your descriptive statistics for all of the variables. So now you have mean through kurtosis for all the different variables. Notice these really large values for variance. That's why we don't really interpret that, because those are in squared units, not the units that the variable is measured in. These numbers are much more meaningful. So, for example, the average sales price was $338,155 with a standard deviation of $192,089. So a very, very big standard deviation relative to, or a pretty large standard deviation relative to the price. There's a statistic that we use to describe that, but we don't really think that much about it. The average home was just under 2,000 square feet. Did not have a partial bath, but had 2 full baths, 3 bedrooms. So if you think about that typical 3-bed, 2-bath, that's a pretty average house in Warren County. So those are descriptive statistics using the Excel functions. If you want to format this and be make it look a little nicer, you can actually come up here and you can use fewer decimal places or more decimal places. 2 is typically sufficient. Sometimes I'll have you go out to 3 or 4 decimal places, but usually 2 decimal places will be fine for most of what you do. I'll always tell you on an assignment what you need there. All right. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do the descriptive statistics is with the Analysis TookPak that I have a link on Blackboard for you to install, but it should be under your Data tab. So if you go to your Data tab, go to Data Analysis right here. We're going to go to Descriptive Statistics. Hit OK. The input range is going to be the range of your data that you want to describe. Now, if you put non-numeric data in here, it's going to give you an error. So what we want to do is go from E1, and we want to go over. So I'm just going to hold down Shift. So it's going to be E1 to K1. And then on a Mac, on a Mac, I'm going to do Command Shift down. And notice that's going to highlight the full range of data. So notice how this little box right here has the full range of data, because the data starts in cell E1 and ends in K1472. Right, so I'm going to scroll back up. let me just do that one more time. So I'm going to highlight the range of data right here. And on a Mac, you do Command Shift down. On a Windows machine, you would do Control Shift down. But if you do, I'm going to go Command Shift down, and that's going to highlight the full range of data. So that's the data that I want to be described. So the data are grouped in columns. I have labels in the first row because I have variable names in the first row. The output range, I'm going to click, I'm just going to start it right here where the other stuff is. So that says M16, and then I'm going to click my summary statistics box right here, and then hit OK. And those are the descriptive statistics for all the variables we selected. But notice it doesn't look very nice. It looks a little clunky because it repeats this column. It repeats this information right here with the what you're actually using, which I don't love that. So if you want to clean this up a little bit, what you have to do, and this is why I don't use this function. I'm going to highlight these names. I'm going to do Command X, or on a Windows machine you do Control X to cut it. Then I'm going to come over one cell and I'm going to paste it. So I'm going to do Command V, it would be Control V on a Windows machine. So now I have days on market, and then I have the statistics for days on market. Then I'm going to highlight all of this stuff. So I'm just going to highlight all of it. I'm going to hold down Command. On a Windows machine, you hold down Control. I'm going to highlight all of this stuff right here. I don't want to highlight that. Well, highlight all of the stuff in the table. I'm going to right click, delete it, shift cells left, and now my table looks a little bit nicer. So now I have the variables in the same order that I have up here. My statistics are in approximately the same order. I want to clean those up a little bit. So I'm going to highlight that range of data. I'm going to go back to Home, and I want to give myself 2 decimal places on everything, so it looks a little bit neater. And notice the numbers match exactly what we have up here. Now we have a couple things here. We have standard error, which is not something we use right now. That will come into play later. But everything else is the same. Sum is the sum of that column, which is again something we're not going to use. Count is just the number of observations that we have, which is, we'll use that later too, but we usually don't have to estimate that explicitly. So that's 2 different ways to estimate your descriptive statistics. You can use either method you want, doesn't matter to me, but you do get, you don't get your Q1, Q3, and your IQR if you do it this way. So you get your standard deviation, you get your range, but you're not going to get those quartiles. You get the median, but not Q1 and Q3. So some pros and cons. Do it however you want to do it. As long as you get the right answer, it doesn't matter to me.